Welcome to this training on breaking undesirable habits. In the training, we'll look at what drives our undesirable habits, the principles of breaking habits, and the behaviour change formula. So this training does form part of my building resilience training, but I want to give you a little taster of some of what we cover. So I've created a video on establishing helpful habits. I'll put the link below this video. So let's talk about why it's important to break habits. First reason, our unhelpful habits can impact our health and hinder recovery from health challenges. For example, if people keep booming and bust, that's really going to hinder your recovery. I talk about boom and bust in other videos, so if you'd like to watch that video, comment boom and bust below. I'll send you the link. For example, staying up late or using unhelpful distractions as a way of dealing with boredom, upset, etc. For instance, binging on foods, biscuits, chocolate, binging on alcohol, etc. These are all things that might give us some temporary relief, but in the long term are going to cause us problems. So let's talk about what we need to understand. So the first thing we need to understand is that we can't rely on willpower. If we could, then smokers who wanted to quit would quit. People who were obese as a result of overeating would be able to stop that and lose weight. People wouldn't binge on biscuits, chocolate, etc. when they were upset. We need to understand the power of habit. Habits are durable because they can be challenging to break. We need to understand that habits are important because they have an impact on our health, our well-being, etc. So we need to understand how to break and form new helpful habits. We need to understand the power of motivation. We need to understand the power of the subconscious. So some of our responses are subconscious. We're doing them without realizing, and that's giving us certain results. For example, someone who binges on chocolate or biscuits might not be fully aware of why they do that behavior. There might be some aspects of that behavior that they understand, but often when I chat to people, they become more aware of some of the patterns that are driving that behavior. So we need to know how to identify those patterns, those unconscious patterns, and how to change them. So let's talk about the behavior change formula. B equals MAP, where B is the behavior. M is the motivation. Our motivation can either be high or low. And motivation is powerful. How long do you think it takes to form a habit? When I ask people this question, they say 21 days or 60 days. There is some research that I think says it takes around 66 days to form a new habit from one of the London universities. But actually it depends. It depends on the individual. It also depends on the situation. So for example, for some people, if I said, I want you to form the new habit of having chocolate for breakfast, some people would find that really easy. It wouldn't take 66 days. They'd be able to do it straight away. If you've got a new car or a new mobile phone, how long does it take you to stop using your old car or mobile phone and start using your new one? You do it straight away. Okay. If I said to you, I will give you £5 million if you meditate for 50 minutes every day for 30 days, how many of you would achieve that? Now, just to make clear, I'm not making that promise, but, I suspect most people would be able to do that. They might break down the meditation into smaller chunks, but they would achieve it because they're highly motivated to win £5 million. Our relationship to sensations, for example, emotions or physical sensations, is that we are able to tolerate some sensation, some emotion, some physical sensation, then we've got a big window of tolerance. And that means we can sit with those sensations. They don't cause us too much pain or discomfort. On the other hand, if our tolerance, our window of tolerance is small, then we're not able to tolerate those emotions, for example, feeling upset or physical sensations, for example, symptoms. And what tends to happen is that we go to our head, we create thoughts and beliefs, for example, and we create stories, we maybe catastrophize, we chastise ourselves because we're not able to tolerate those sensations that we're experiencing. Now, what's going to happen is that's going to result in feelings of discomfort, and what that's going to do is result in certain behaviors. For example, we might feel highly motivated when we're in discomfort or pain to reach for biscuits, chocolate, or a glass of wine. Other people might smoke or get into addictive, compulsive behaviors that just ease the discomfort. They go into distraction. Now, what that means is we create this stress loop where we experience some stress and we want to experience pleasure. So we engage in those activities that I've just mentioned, and then we chastise ourselves, feel annoyed that we've binged on biscuits or chocolate, etc. And that's going to result in more pain, and therefore that's going to result in more stress, and the spiral continues. So let's talk about the pain-pleasure principle in a bit more detail. Consider the unhelpful behavior. Maybe I'm binging on chocolate when I'm upset. What I'm doing in that situation is I'm focusing on the short-term pleasure of doing that, and I'm ignoring the long-term pain of that behavior. And I'm also focusing on the short-term pain of doing something more helpful, maybe meditating, because that's not going to give me instant relief. And I'm ignoring the long-term benefits of doing a more helpful behavior. Okay, so the goal here is that we need to shift from the short-term thinking. This is where we're focusing on our MIG rather than our WIG. MIG stands for mildly important goal, and WIG stands for wildly important goal. Okay, so a wildly important goal is that thing that's really most important to us. But actually, in these moments when we do the unhelpful behavior, we're not focusing on our wildly important goal. That terminology came from one of the coaches I worked with called Brian Johnson, and I made up the term MIG, mildly important goal. Okay, so we get focused on our mildly important goal. So the A in the formula stands for ability. Something can either be hard for us to do or easy. And the P in the formula stands for prompts. The green line is the action line. If the prompt is below the action line, then we're going to fail. So an example of that is if someone says, I'm going to run a marathon tomorrow, and their motivation is very low and their ability is very low, that's very hard for them to do, they're going to fail. Whereas, for example, if they say, I'm going to walk for 5 minutes, and they're highly motivated to do that because it's a lovely day and that for them is really easy, then they're more likely to succeed. So, for example, if someone is prone to binging on biscuits, they can either make it really easy to do that behavior or more difficult. So, for example, if there aren't any biscuits in the house, and let's say they're in the middle of the countryside, then it's not easy for them to go and get some biscuits. If the biscuits are in the cupboard and they've got loads of them, then it's really easy for them to do that. And the prompt in this situation is, I'm feeling upset, and therefore they eat the biscuits. So we can actually wire our brain for instant pleasure, okay? So in this diagram, we've got a black neuron, that's the stimulus, and red and green neuron is the response neuron. Now, if someone, every time they get upset, they reach for biscuits because that's going to give them a source of pleasure, then what happens is if they keep practicing that behavior, the neurons get thicker and faster. It's easier for them to do that response. It's more difficult for them to do that helpful response that at the moment they view as not giving them pleasure. So, for example, if you say to someone, well, hey, why don't you just meditate for 5 minutes to calm your physiology down? They might not view that as a solution to their pain. all right? So it's harder for them to do that. So if they keep practicing that response, reaching for biscuits every time they get upset, then that's going to become hardwired. It's really easy for them to do that. They get that instant pleasure in the moment, but ultimately in the long term, it's going to give them some pain. So how do we shift this? First of all, we need to shift our thinking from short-term thinking to long-term thinking. We need to train ourselves to focus on our WIG rather than our MIG. And when I train people, I really teach them how to do that, how to implement strategies to help them become more conscious of their wildly important goal, which in the moment when they're feeling distress or upset can be forgotten. They're only focusing on their MIG, their mildly important goal. So how do we do that? Well, we need to make the shift from focusing on the short-term pleasure of doing that unhelpful behavior to not focusing on that and focusing on the long-term pain of doing that unhelpful behavior. And in relation to the helpful behavior, rather than focusing on the pain of doing it in the short term, we focus on the long-term gain and benefits that we're going to get from doing that helpful behavior. So we've talked about making it harder for us to do a particular behavior, for instance, by not having biscuits in the house, and making it easier for us to do the thing we want to do. For instance, if someone decides they want to break that habit of going for biscuits and doing a more useful behavior, they might put, for instance, a post-it note on the cupboard with a note to, for instance, meditate or go for a walk instead of reaching for the biscuits. But that can be a little bit of a sticking plaster, because there are always going to be situations, let's say you're at a party where there's biscuits, or if you have a tendency to drink too much, there's going to be alcohol. Okay, so we need to consider how to rewire our brain to condition ourselves to ignore the short-term pleasure of those unhelpful strategies and focus on the long-term pleasure of the helpful strategies. So the good news is we do have the ability to make conscious choices. To begin with, it might be easier to do that unhelpful pattern, but with practice, we can create new responses. The more we practice that, the wiring in the brain starts to change. The neurons that we start to use move closer together. The neurons that we don't use move further away and get smaller. And so now it becomes easier to do this new beneficial behavior. With practice, it can become automatic. So the next thing we can do is make a pact with ourselves. Okay, P stands for patience. It's really important that we're patient when it comes to breaking patterns, establishing new habits. It's good to cultivate acceptance that we're not perfect. We might have to practice something. We need to have compassion towards ourselves. And we need to have a sense of trust that ultimately we can make these shifts. And if you consider that you establish this unhelpful habit by practicing it, you've also established more useful habits. When I ask people how often do they brush their teeth, most people say a couple of times or more. Occasionally people say, oh, actually, that's not something I'm very good at. But consider that whatever we practice, we do get good at. So if we put all of that into practice, we can create a healing loop whereby we experience stress, and instead of giving ourselves a hard time, we navigate the pain. And instead of chastising ourselves, we affirm that we're on track. It's okay to be human. It's okay to make mistakes. With practice, we can get there. And then we get a sense of pleasure when we do actually break the pattern. Now, we are always going to have stress in our lives, but by practicing these approaches, we can learn to cultivate more calm, and that supports our body's healing. So that's a very brief overview of breaking undesirable habits and forming ones that we want. When I work with people, I give them tools to help them put all of this into practice, how to implement and create habits to support them cultivating the behaviours that they want. If you'd like to know more about the Building Resilience training, or got any questions, just get in touch. If you like this video, do leave a like and a comment. Love to know what your key takeaway is. What's one action you're going to take? And do share this video with anyone who might find it helpful. Keep going, you've got this. Wishing you great health.